A beggar woman saved an Arab millionaire, making him stop before the accident. What the girl asked for made the millionaire become horrified right away. Sarah pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders as she navigated through the bustling streets of Manhattan. At 12 years old, she had already mastered the art of becoming invisible when needed and commanding attention when necessary. The late autumn wind whipped through the concrete canyons of New York City, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of another cold night. The shelter where she stayed wouldn't open its doors for another few hours, so she killed time by watching the endless parade of successful people rushing past her. Their designer clothes and important phone calls were a stark contrast to her second-hand sneakers and the small notebook she carried everywhere, her most prized possession, containing the few memories she had of her mother. Tonight was different, though. The usual crowd of suited executives was joined by a fleet of black SUVs pulling up to the curb outside the gleaming Tower 7 building. Sarah watched with curiosity as security personnel created a path through the crowd. Something about their urgency caught her attention, making her pause her usual evening wandering. That's when she saw him, a distinguished-looking man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything in the shelter combined. Kamal al-Rahman, though Sarah didn't know his name yet, was completely absorbed in his phone, his fingers flying across the screen as he stepped off the curb without looking. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. The taxi was coming too fast, its driver distracted by his own GPS. Without thinking, Sarah launched herself forward, her small frame moving with the agility that life on the streets had taught her. She grabbed the sleeve of the man's expensive suit and yanked him backward with all her might. The taxi horn blared as it sped past, missing them by inches. The man stumbled but caught his balance, his phone clattering to the sidewalk. For a moment, everything was chaos, his security detail rushing forward, the crowd gasping, someone shouting. But Sarah remained focused on the man's face, as realization dawned in his dark eyes. He said, his accent thick but his English precise. "You just saved my life." Sarah shrugged, already beginning to retreat. She didn't like attention, especially not from adults who usually just wanted her to go away. But something in his expression made her pause. Not pity, which she hated, but genuine wonder. The man's security team formed a protective circle around them, but he waved them back, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. He straightened his suit jacket with the casual elegance of someone used to wearing fine clothes and bent down to retrieve his phone. When he stood again, he studied her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the sidewalk. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sarah," she answered, surprising herself. She usually gave fake names. "Sarah," he repeated as if testing the weight of it on his tongue. "I am in your debt. In my culture, we take such debts very seriously. Please let me repay your kindness. What would you like, new clothes, a proper meal?" Sarah's heart pounded. She dreamed of this moment, not the saving part, but the moment when someone with real power might be willing to help her. She'd rehearsed it in her head during countless cold nights in the shelter, though she'd never truly believed it would happen. "I don't want clothes or food," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I want you to help me find my mother." The man's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. Behind him, a woman in a sharp business suit stepped forward, tablet in hand. Sarah hadn't noticed her before, but something about her efficient manner suggested she was used to handling unexpected situations. "Sir," the woman began, "the board is waiting." But Kamal al-Rahman held up a hand, silencing her. His dark eyes remained fixed on Sarah, searching her face as if looking for something. "Your mother," he said finally. "Tell me more." Sarah's fingers instinctively went to the notebook in her jacket pocket. "She left me at Hope's Haven Children's Home 3 years ago. She was crying when she did it. She left this note saying she had no choice, that it was to protect me." Sarah's voice caught. She promised she'd come back when it was safe, but she never did. A look passed between the businessman and his assistant that Sarah couldn't quite read. The woman's fingers were already moving across her tablet, her expression focused. "Ms. Chen," the man said to his assistant, "clear my schedule for the evening." He turned back to Sarah, and for the first time, a gentle smile softened his features. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere warmer. There's a cafe around the corner that makes excellent hot chocolate. Would you join me, Sarah? Sarah hesitated, years of street-taught caution warring with desperate hope. The assistant, Ms. Chen, stepped closer, her face kind despite her professional demeanor. I'll be there too, she said softly, as if understanding Sarah's concern. Looking up at these two elegantly dressed adults, Sarah made a decision that would change her life forever. She nodded. Excellent, the man said. He held out his hand formally, making Sarah feel like an equal rather than a charity case. I am Kamal al-Rahman, and I promise you, Sarah, we will do everything in our power to find your mother. As they walked toward the cafe, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. What she couldn't know, was that her simple act of heroism had set in motion events that would unravel secrets long buried and connect lives in ways none of them could have imagined. The cafe was a warm haven of polished wood and soft jazz music, worlds away from Sarah's usual haunts. She sat in a plush leather booth, her hands wrapped around a mug of the richest hot chocolate she'd ever tasted, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the contrast between this moment and her normal life. Kamal al-Rahman sat across from her, his own coffee untouched, while Ms. Chen occupied the seat beside him, her tablet ready. The security team had positioned themselves discreetly around the cafe, their presence both reassuring and slightly unnerving. Tell me everything you remember about your mother, Kamal said gently. Every detail might be important. Sarah pulled out her notebook, its pages worn soft with handling. Her name is Rebecca Martinez. She worked as a housekeeper, but I don't know where exactly. She used to tell me stories about the beautiful houses she cleaned, especially one with a garden full of roses that bloomed all year round. Ms. Chen's fingers froze on her tablet. Sir, she said quietly, the Dubai property. Kamal nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Continue, sir. The day she left me at Hope's Haven, she was different, scared. She kept looking over her shoulder like someone was following us. Sarah swallowed hard. She gave me this notebook and told me to write down everything I remembered about her, so I wouldn't forget. She said she'd come back when things were safe again. Ms. Chen was typing rapidly now, her professional composure slightly cracked. Mr. Al-Rahman, I'm finding records of a Rebecca Martinez employed at your Dubai residence from 2010 to 2011. She was part of the domestic staff, but left suddenly without notice. Sarah's eyes widened. You knew my mother? Kamal leaned back, his face unreadable. I owned several properties at that time. Many people worked for me. But this, he paused, studying Sarah's face with new intensity. Ms. Chen, what else can you find about Ms. Martinez's employment? Records show she was primarily assigned to the indoor garden wing. The rose garden you commissioned was her responsibility. Ms. Chen's voice held a note of discovery. Sir, according to these records, she lived on the property. There might still be personal effects in storage. Sarah leaned forward eagerly. Can we go look? Please? The Dubai property was sold last year, Kamal said, but all staff belongings were properly archived. Ms. Chen, arrange for those boxes to be sent to New York immediately. Already done, sir. They should arrive within 48 hours. Kamal turned back to Sarah. Now about your current situation. Hope's Haven, you said. Sarah nodded, trying not to show how much she didn't want to return there. The shelter wasn't terrible, but it wasn't home. It never would be. Ms. Chen, please contact Hope's Haven. We need to review their records regarding Sarah and her mother. Also, arrange for appropriate temporary guardianship papers. Sarah will not be returning to the shelter tonight. Sarah's heart skipped. What do you mean? I have a penthouse with several guest rooms. Ms. Chen will stay there as well to ensure you're comfortable. He raised a hand as Sarah started to protest. You saved my life today, Sarah. Allow me to ensure your safety while we search for your mother. Ms. Chen was already on her phone, speaking quietly but firmly to someone about arrangements. Sarah felt dizzy with the speed at which her life was changing. Just hours ago, she'd been wondering where she might find dinner. And now, there's something else, Sarah said, pulling a folded paper from her notebook. Mom left this with me, but I could never figure out what it means. It looks like some kind of code. Kamal took the paper carefully. Written on it was a series of numbers and letters. DR711H3. His face changed for just a moment. Surprise, recognition, before returning to its careful neutrality. He shared a significant look with Ms. Chen, who immediately began typing again. Sir? she said after a moment. "That matches the filing system used in your corporate archives pre-2015. "Indeed it does," Kamal replied softly. He folded the paper and handed it back to Sarah. "It seems your mother left us a trail to follow, Sarah. The question is, what was she trying to lead us to?" As they left the cafe, Sarah clutched her notebook close. The sky had darkened, and the first few drops of rain were falling, but for the first time in years she wasn't worried about finding shelter. Instead, her mind was racing with questions. Why did her mother leave that code? What connection did she really have to this wealthy man? And why did both Kamal and Miss Chen seem so intrigued by such a simple sequence of numbers and letters? In the sleek black SUV that whisked them uptown, Sarah watched the city lights blur through Rain Street windows. She didn't notice the way Kamal studied her reflection in the glass, his expression troubled and thoughtful. Nor did she see Ms. Chen sending a series of encrypted messages, reaching out to contacts who might help unravel the mystery of Rebecca Martinez's disappearance. What none of them knew was that the code in Sarah's notebook was just the first piece of a much larger puzzle, one that would force them all to confront truths they never expected to discover. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of one of Manhattan's most prestigious buildings, but Sarah barely noticed the luxury surrounding her. Her attention was fixed on the wall of windows overlooking the glittering city below, remembering how many nights she'd spent looking up at buildings like this one, wondering about the lives lived in those bright windows above. Ms. Chen, "Please call me Victoria," had efficiently arranged everything within hours. A room had been prepared, complete with new clothes in Sarah's size, but she felt more comfortable sitting in the living room, still wearing her warm jacket, her notebook close at hand. "The boxes from Dubai will arrive tomorrow morning," Victoria said, setting a cup of chamomile tea in front of Sarah. "In the meantime, I've been going through our digital archives." She glanced at Kamal, who nodded for her to continue. Rebecca Martinez worked at the Dubai property for exactly 18 months. Her employee file is impressively detailed. Exceptional work reviews, perfect attendance, multiple commendations from other staff members. Then suddenly, she disappeared. No notice, no forwarding address. Sarah clutched her notebook tighter. When was this exactly? Victoria consulted her tablet. She left on November 7th, 2011. "That's..." Sarah's voice caught. "That's the day I was born." The room fell silent. Kamal, who had been standing by the windows, turned sharply. "Are you certain?" Sarah nodded, pulling out her birth certificate, one of the few documents she had kept safe all these years. Victoria took it gently, her professional composure slipping slightly as she read. "Sir," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "according to this, Sarah was born at the American hospital in Dubai." Kamal moved closer, his expression intense. "The same hospital where I had my appendix removed that same month." He sat down heavily in the armchair across from Sarah. "I was in that hospital for 3 days. I remember the gardens. I used to walk there during my recovery." Sarah looked between them, sensing the weight of unspoken thoughts filling the room. "What aren't you telling me?" Victoria and Kamal exchanged glances before Victoria spoke. "There's something else in these records. During the same period your mother worked at the Dubai property. There was an ongoing corporate investigation involving Marcus Fleming, Mr. Al-Rahman's former business partner. Fleming," Kamal said the name with careful neutrality, "was involved in some questionable dealings. He was using his position to access sensitive information, attempting to manipulate company stocks. When we discovered this, he became desperate." "The timing matches," Victoria added, pulling up more documents on her tablet. "The investigation into Fleming reached its peak in late 2011, right before your mother left." Sarah's mind was racing. "The code she left me, DR711H3, the 711 part. Could that be July 2011? Victoria's fingers flew across her tablet. DR could stand for Dubai Records and H3. She paused, looking up at Kamal. "Sir, wasn't the indoor garden wing in House 3? Where your mother tended the roses," Kamal said softly, studying Sarah's face with growing intensity. "Fleming had an office in that wing. He used to spend hours there, supposedly working on overseas calls due to the time difference. But he was really accessing the company's secure servers through a private terminal," Victoria finished. "We discovered that later during the investigation." Sarah leaned forward. "So my mum might have seen something. Is that why she had to leave?" Perhaps, Kamal replied, but his tone suggested he was considering something else entirely. Victoria, I need you to access the sealed records from the Fleming investigation. Everything from 2011, especially anything involving House 3. Victoria nodded, already typing. Sir, those files are under highest level encryption. It will take time. Then we'll focus on what we can access now. Kamal turned to Sarah. Tomorrow, when the boxes arrive, we might find more answers. For tonight, you should rest. It's been an extraordinary day. Sarah wanted to protest, but exhaustion was starting to creep in. The events of the day felt surreal. This morning, she had been just another invisible street kid, and now she was sitting in a penthouse with people who seemed genuinely determined to help her. As Victoria showed her to her room, Sarah couldn't help but notice how Kamal remained in the living room, staring out at the city lights, his reflection in the window showing an expression she couldn't quite read, something between concern and recognition. In her room, Sarah placed her notebook on the bedside table and lay down on sheets softer than anything she'd ever felt. Her mind whirled with questions. Why had her mother been so afraid? What had she seen in House 3? And why did Kamal al-Rahman look at her sometimes as if he were seeing a ghost? Outside her door, Victoria made a quiet phone call. Yes, I need those hospital records from Dubai, November 2011. All of them. And run a cross-reference on Rebecca Martinez and Marcus Fleming. I need to know if there were any direct interactions. In his private study, Kamal opened a safe and removed a photo he hadn't looked at in years, a company event in Dubai, summer 2011. In the background, barely visible through a doorway, was a young woman tending to roses, her face turned away from the camera. He placed the photo carefully on his desk, next to a small mirror that reflected his own features, and then Sarah's face appeared in his mind. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Morning brought a flurry of activity to the penthouse. The boxes from Dubai arrived early, filling the living room with the musty smell of archived memories. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully examining each item while Victoria catalogued everything on her tablet. Look at this, Sarah said, pulling out a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Inside were pressed rose petals, dried but still faintly fragrant, and beneath them a collection of photographs. Victoria moved closer as Sarah spread the photos on the floor. They showed the Dubai property's famous rose garden from various angles, but one photo made them both pause. It showed Rebecca Martinez standing beside a rose bush, smiling directly at the camera. She wore a simple uniform, but her pose suggested someone had caught her in a moment of joy. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered, touching the photo gently. The resemblance between mother and daughter was striking. The same dark curls, the same gentle curve of smile. Victoria picked up another photo and studied it carefully. "Sarah, look at this one. Your mother isn't the subject, but she's in the background. This appears to be a corporate event." The photo showed a group of businessmen in suits gathered around a table on a terrace. In the background, through an archway, Rebecca could be seen talking to someone. A man in an expensive suit, his back to the camera. "That's Marcus Fleming," Victoria said, her voice tight. "This was taken 2 months before your mother left." Sarah leaned closer. "They look like they're arguing." "Sir," Victoria called out, and Kamal emerged from his study. "You need to see this." Kamal examined the photo, his expression darkening. "I remember this day. Fleming had been acting strangely for weeks. This was shortly after we began suspecting him of insider trading." "There's something else," Victoria said, pulling up documents on her tablet. "I found a connection. Fleming made multiple large transfers to offshore accounts in late 2011. One of the recipient names caught my attention. Martinez Holdings." Sarah's head snapped up. "My mom's name. A shell company," Kamal said grimly. "Fleming was known for creating fake companies to hide his transactions. But why use your mother's name? Unless she found out what he was doing," Victoria finished. "Working in House 3, she would have had access to that wing at all hours. She might have seen something she wasn't supposed to see." Sarah dug deeper into the box, pulling out an envelope. Inside was a letter, the paper creased and worn. "It's from my mum," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Dated October 2011. The letter was addressed to someone named Kay and began, "I don't know who else to trust. What I've discovered goes deeper than anyone suspects. Fleming isn't just stealing information. He's using it to manipulate people, to hide something bigger. I have proof, but it's not safe to reveal it yet. Not with what I now know." The letter ended abruptly, as if Rebecca had been interrupted while writing it. It was never sent. Kamal took the letter carefully, his hands not quite steady. "Kay," he said softly. "She was trying to reach out to me." "Sir," Victoria interjected, her eyes on her tablet, "I've managed to access some of Fleming's private files from that period. There are multiple references to Project Rose Garden. The dates align with Rebecca's employment." "Project Rose Garden?" Sarah asked. "A code name," Kamal explained. "Fleming insisted on establishing that private server in House 3, claiming it was for a special development project. We later discovered he was using it to store confidential information for blackmail." Sarah pulled out more items from the box. Her mother's employee badge, a small notebook filled with what looked like dates and times on a USB drive. Victoria immediately reached for the drive. This could be important. The encryption on Fleming's files was sophisticated for 2011, but with current technology... "Wait," Kamal said, studying the USB drive. "Look at the base. That's not a standard drive, it's a corporate security key. These were used to access our most sensitive files." He looked at Sarah. "Your mother didn't just stumble onto Fleming's activities. She was gathering evidence." Sarah absorbed this information, her mind racing. But why didn't she take this to someone? Why run away? Because Fleming must have discovered what she knew, Victoria suggested. But Kamal shook his head. "No, there's more to it than that." Fleming was desperate during those months, but not just about the financial investigations. He was terrified of something else being revealed. Kamal picked up the photo of Rebecca in the rose garden again, studying it intently. Something that would have destroyed more than just his career. As if on cue, Victoria's tablet chimed. "Sir, the hospital records from Dubai just arrived, and there's something you need to see." Immediately, the room fell silent as Victoria handed the tablet to Kamal. His face remained composed as he read, but his knuckles whitened where he gripped the tablet's edge. Sarah watched this exchange, feeling the weight of unspoken revelations filling the room. Whatever was in those hospital records had changed something fundamental. She could see it in the way Kamal now looked at her, in the way Victoria's professional demeanor had softened into something like protective concern. "Sarah," Kamal said finally, his voice gentle but firm, "I think it's time we told you what really happened in Dubai in 2011. About your mother, about Fleming, and about me." The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows, illuminating the scattered photographs, the open boxes, the faces of three people about to discover how deeply their lives were already intertwined. The silence in the penthouse felt heavy with anticipation as Kamal carefully placed the tablet on the coffee table. Sarah sat perfectly still, her mother's box of memories in her lap, waiting for the revelation she somehow knew would change everything. "I met your mother in Dubai during the spring of 2011, Kamal began, his voice soft but clear. "Not just in passing as her employer, but really met her. The Rose Garden was my sanctuary during that time. I was dealing with the stress of Fleming's increasingly suspicious behavior, and I would often walk there in the evenings." Victoria quietly moved to close the curtains against the brightening morning sun, giving them privacy from the world outside. Rebecca was always there, tending to the roses even after her shift had ended. She loved them, understood them in a way that went beyond simple gardening. We started talking first about the flowers, then about everything else. Kamal's eyes grew distant with memory. She was different from anyone I'd ever known. Genuine, brilliant. She could see straight through corporate pretense to what really mattered. Sarah clutched her notebook tighter, her heart pounding. You knew her well. "We fell in love," Kamal said simply. "It was completely unexpected and, given our positions, complicated. We kept it private. Office relationships were strictly forbidden, and with Fleming already causing problems, I couldn't risk any corporate scandals. But we were happy." Victoria's tablet chimed again, but she silenced it with a quick gesture, her eyes never leaving Kamal's face. Then, in late summer, Rebecca started acting differently. She seemed afraid, distracted. She'd make excuses not to meet, would change the subject whenever I asked what was wrong. He paused, regret clear in his voice. "I thought perhaps she'd simply grown tired of the secrecy, of having to hide our relationship." "The hospital records," Victoria said gently. show that Rebecca discovered she was pregnant in August 2011. Sarah's breath caught. She looked at Kamal, really looked at him, seeing her own features reflected in his face, the shape of their eyes, the curve of their jawline. "She never told me," Kamal continued, his composure cracking slightly. "Instead, she disappeared. I searched for her, of course, but she had vanished completely. It wasn't until years later, when Fleming's crimes were fully exposed, that I began to understand why. Fleming had discovered your relationship," Victoria explained, pulling up more documents. "He was already embezzling funds, but he found something much more valuable: leverage. The conservative board members would have forced Kamal out if they discovered he had a relationship with an employee. Fleming used this to protect himself, threatening to expose everything if anyone looked too closely at his activities. But why didn't Mom just tell you about me?" Sarah asked Kamal, her voice small but steady. "Because Fleming didn't just threaten to expose our relationship," Kamal replied, anger finally seeping into his voice. "He threatened to destroy all evidence of his own crimes and frame your mother for them instead. She would have faced serious charges, and you..." He met Sarah's eyes. "You would have been taken away from her immediately. Fleming made sure she knew that." Sarah processed this information, emotions warring on her face. "So she ran to protect both of us. She left me at the shelter to keep me safe from Fleming. The code she left you," Victoria added, "DR711H3. It wasn't just about Fleming's office in House 3. July 2011 was when she first discovered his illegal activities. But it was also when she found out she was going to have me," Sarah finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. Kamal moved to sit beside Sarah, careful to give her space. "Sarah, I need you to know, if I had known about you, nothing would have stopped me from finding you both. Fleming's threats, the board, none of it would have mattered." Sarah looked down at the box in her lap, at the pressed roses and old photos, at the evidence her mother had carefully gathered. Do you think she was trying to find a way back? That's why she kept all this?" "The USB drive proves it," Victoria said. "She wasn't just gathering evidence against Fleming. She was creating a safety net. If anything happened to her, there would be proof of both Fleming's crimes and your true parentage. Your mother was protecting everyone," Kamal said softly. "She protected you from Fleming's threats, protected me from corporate scandal, and protected herself from false accusations. But she never stopped trying to find a way to make things right." Sarah reached into the box and pulled out one final item, a small, wrapped package with her name on it. Inside was a delicate silver locket, and within it a tiny photograph of Rebecca holding a newborn Sarah, both of them bathed in Dubai's golden sunlight. "I remember taking that picture," Kamal said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just didn't know. I never saw her again after that day." Victoria's tablet chimed once more, this time with an urgency she couldn't ignore. "Sir, the facial recognition search just got a hit. We found her." The room stilled as Victoria turned her tablet around, showing them a security camera image from 3 days ago. There, leaving a small nursing home in Connecticut, was Rebecca Martinez. Barely aged despite the years, still carrying herself with the same quiet grace they saw in the old photographs. "She's alive," Sarah whispered, hope blooming in her voice. "She's really alive, and she's close." Kamal stood, decision clear in his stance. "Victoria, have the car brought around. It's time we finished what Rebecca started 12 years ago. It's time we brought your mother home, Sarah." As they prepared to leave, Sarah tucked the locket into her pocket, feeling its weight against her heart. For the first time in years, she felt complete, understood, part of something larger than herself. She had found her father, and soon she would find her mother too. What none of them realized was that they weren't the only ones who had been searching. In his Manhattan office, Marcus Fleming was already receiving an alert about unusual access to his old files, about questions being asked in Dubai, about a girl who looked far too familiar for comfort. The drive to Connecticut stretched out before them like a path to another world. Sarah sat in the back of the luxurious SUV, watching the city gradually give way to autumn-painted suburbs. Beside her, Victoria worked tirelessly on her tablet, coordinating with the security team and gathering more information about the nursing home where Rebecca had been spotted. "Sunset Valley Care Center," Victoria reported, breaking the contemplative silence. "It's a small private facility specializing in long-term care and rehabilitation. Rebecca isn't a patient. She works there as a patient care coordinator. She always wanted to help people, Kamal said from the front seat, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Even in Dubai, she would spend her free time assisting the older housekeepers, making their work easier. Sarah traced the pattern of her locket with her fingertips. Do you think she'll want to see us? After all this time? The evidence suggests she's been trying to leave us a trail, Victoria replied gently. The code, the USB drive, keeping all those memories safe, she wanted to be found when the time was right. Kamal's phone chimed with a message. Victoria checked it and frowned. Sir, there's been unusual activity in the old server records. Someone else is accessing files from 2011. Fleming, Kamal said grimly. He must have monitoring systems in place, alerts for anyone looking into that period. Should we turn back? Victoria asked, but Kamal shook his head. No, we've waited too long already. Victoria, implement Protocol Sunset, lock down all access to the old servers, redirect any incoming traces. I want Fleming walking in circles while we find Rebecca. Sarah leaned forward. But won't he figure out where we're going? If he's been watching Mom too. That's exactly why we need to reach her first, Kamal explained. Your mother has lived in fear of Fleming's threats for 12 years. It ends today. Victoria's fingers flew across her tablet. I've arranged for a separate security team to create a diversion. As far as Fleming's surveillance can tell, we're heading to Boston for an emergency board meeting. The nursing home appeared ahead of them, a graceful Victorian mansion converted into a care facility. Ancient oak trees lined the circular drive, their leaves creating a canopy of red and gold above them. Wait, Victoria said as they pulled up. Let me check the situation first. We don't want to overwhelm her. She disappeared into the building while Sarah and Kamal waited in the car, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah studied her father's profile, still amazed by how much they looked alike. She had spent years imagining her family, but reality was turning out to be more extraordinary than any of her dreams. Victoria returned 15 minutes later, her professional composure slightly shaken. She's here, but there's something you need to know. Rebecca's been using a different name, Maria Santos. She's well liked here, dedicated to her patients. But she never stays in one place more than a year. She was planning to leave next week. Still running, Kamal said softly, still trying to stay ahead of Fleming's threats. How do we do this? Sarah asked, her voice small but determined. How do we tell her she doesn't have to run anymore? Victoria hesitated. There's more. One of the nurses mentioned that Rebecca keeps a photo on her desk, a baby girl in a Dubai hospital. She looks at it every day. Sarah's hand went to her locket, where the same photo was preserved. She made a decision and opened the car door. I'm going in first, alone. Sarah, Kamal began, but she shook her head. Mom left to protect me. She needs to see that I'm okay, but I understand why she did what she did. Then we can tell her about everything else. Victoria and Kamal exchanged glances before nodding. We'll be right here, Kamal assured her. Take this, Victoria added, handing her a small communications device. Just in case. Sarah walked through the front doors, her heart pounding but her steps steady. The facility was warm and welcoming, filled with soft lighting and the quiet bustle of caring people going about their work. At the nurse's station, a kind-faced woman looked up. Can I help you? I'm looking for Maria Santos, Sarah said, proud that her voice didn't shake. Oh, she's in the sunroom doing her afternoon readings with Mr. Peterson. Down the hall, last door on the right. Sarah followed the directions, pausing in the doorway of a bright room filled with plants and comfortable chairs. And there she was, Rebecca Martinez, sitting beside an elderly man, reading from a well-worn book of poetry. Her dark curls were streaked with a few strands of silver, but her smile was exactly the same as in the photographs. Sarah must have made some small sound because Rebecca looked up. Their eyes met, and the book slipped from her hands. I'll finish this later, George, Rebecca said to her patient, her voice surprisingly steady despite the shock in her eyes. I need a moment. She stood slowly as if in a dream and walked towards Sarah. They studied each other in silence, years of separation and longing hanging between them like a tangible thing. You found me, Rebecca whispered finally. My beautiful girl, you actually found me. And then they were hugging. 12 years of fear and separation, dissolving in a flood of tears and whispered apologies. Behind them, the afternoon sun painted the room in shades of gold. not unlike the light in that long-ago Dubai hospital room where their journey had begun. Neither of them noticed the shadow that passed by the window outside, or the quiet click of a camera capturing their reunion. In his Manhattan office, Fleming was about to receive one final alert, one that would force him to make a desperate move to protect his carefully guarded secrets. The sunroom had become their sanctuary, a quiet space where 12 years of separation were slowly being bridged with tears and trembling words. Rebecca kept one arm around Sarah, as if afraid her daughter might disappear if she let go, while she processed everything her daughter had just told her about the past few days. "You saved Kamal's life," she said softly, wonder in her voice. "Of all the ways you could have found each other." "He's outside," Sarah said gently. "With Victoria Chen. They helped me find you. We found the USB drive, Mum. We know about Fleming's threats." Rebecca tensed slightly, her eyes darting to the window. "Fleming, if he knows where I am, he can't hurt us anymore," Sarah assured her. "Kamal has proof of everything now. The corporate records, the blackmail, all of it. You don't have to run anymore." Rebecca touched the locket around Sarah's neck, identical to the one she wore hidden beneath her uniform. "I never wanted to leave you. Every day I thought about coming back, but Fleming had people watching. He made it clear what would happen if I ever tried to contact either of you. Why didn't you tell Father about me before you left?" Rebecca's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Fleming had already started making threats. He said he would make sure I was blamed for his financial crimes, that I would go to prison, and you would end up in the system. I couldn't risk that. You deserve better than to be born into scandal and shame." "Ms. Santos?" A nurse appeared in the doorway, concern on her face. "There's a call for you at the front desk. Something about an urgent family matter?" Rebecca froze. "I didn't give this number to any family." Sarah was already pressing the communication device Victoria had given her. Within moments, Kamal and Victoria burst through the sunroom doors, security teams moving efficiently to secure the area. "Fleming," Victoria said grimly, checking her tablet. "He's trying to trace the call. We need to move now." Rebecca stood, her professional calm warring with years of ingrained fear. "My patient, I can't just leave them." "It's all taken care of," Victoria assured her. "We've arranged for temporary coverage. Your patients will be well cared for." Kamal stepped forward, seeing Rebecca for the first time in 12 years. The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken words and lost time. "Rebecca," he said softly. "Kamal." Her voice caught on his name. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "I understand now. But we need to get you both somewhere safe. Fleming is desperate. He knows we have evidence against him." Victoria's tablet chimed urgently. "Sir, Fleming's accessing the old Dubai security protocols. He's trying to erase the backup servers." "Too late," Kamal said with grim satisfaction. "Victoria implemented Protocol Sunset an hour ago. Everything's been copied to secure servers. He's trying to erase evidence that no longer exists where he can reach it." Rebecca reached for Sarah's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Where are we going?" "The Hampton estate," Victoria answered, already coordinating with the security team. "It's secure, private, and the security system was completely overhauled last month. Fleming won't be able to track us there." As they moved quickly through the nursing home's halls, Rebecca paused to squeeze the hand of an elderly patient. "I'll be back soon, Martha. Jenny will take good care of you until then." In the parking lot, they split into two vehicles, Sarah and Rebecca in one, Kamal and Victoria in the other. As they pulled away, Sarah noticed her mother watching the nursing home recede in the side mirror. "You really love it here, don't you?" she asked. Rebecca smiled softly. "I found peace here, helping people, but I never stopped looking for a way to come back to you. Every job, every move, I was gathering information, trying to find a way to expose Fleming without putting you at risk. The code you left me was a key to everything I'd discovered. I knew someday you'd be old enough to understand, to maybe even find your way to Kamal. I just never imagined—" She touched Sarah's cheek gently. "You're so brave, Habibi. Just like your father." Sarah leaned into her mother's touch. "Did you love him back in Dubai?" "Very much," Rebecca answered without hesitation. "It wasn't just some corporate romance. Kamal was different from anyone I'd ever known. Kind, genuine, more interested in his gardens than his wealth. Fleming couldn't understand that. He thought everything could be bought or sold." Victoria's voice came through the car's communication system. We're being followed. 2 black SUVs about half a mile back. Fleming's people? Sarah asked, fear creeping into her voice. Not for long, their driver assured, making a series of swift turns that showcased years of evasive driving training. Through it all, Rebecca held Sarah close, whispering soft words of comfort in a mixture of English and Arabic, the same way she used to when Sarah was a baby. In the other car, Kamal watched their vehicle intently, his hands clenched into fists as he fought the urge to order both cars to turn around and confront Fleming directly. What none of them could know was that Fleming had already set in motion a plan that would force such a confrontation, whether they wanted it or not. In his desperation to protect himself, he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, one that would finally bring all the secrets of Dubai into the light. The Hampton estate sprawled elegantly across several acres, its manicured grounds surrounded by state-of-the-art security systems. As their vehicles passed through the imposing gates, Sarah caught her breath at the sight of gorgeously maintained gardens that reminded her of the Dubai photographs. The roses, Rebecca whispered, noticing them too. I'll still keep roses. I never could bring myself to change the gardens, Kamal said as they all gathered in the estate's grand foyer. They reminded me of better times. Victoria efficiently directed the security team to their positions before joining the family in the main living room. The space was warm and inviting despite its luxury, with comfortable furnishings and large windows overlooking the gardens. Fleming's vehicles turned back at the county line, Victoria reported. But he'll try something else. He's too invested now to simply give up. Let me see what you found, Rebecca said, her voice stronger now that they were safely behind the estate's walls. Show me what was on the USB drive. Victoria pulled up the files on a large screen. Years of financial records, surveillance footage, and email exchanges played out before them, the complete story of Fleming's elaborate scheme. He wasn't just embezzling, Rebecca explained as they reviewed the evidence. He was building a network of shell companies, using them to hide money for several board members who were involved in insider trading. When I discovered the connection, he thought he could buy my silence. But you kept gathering evidence instead, Kamal said, pride evident in his voice. Rebecca nodded. I knew someday I'd need proof, not just of his crimes, but of everything, including Sarah's true parentage. Fleming had threatened to alter records to make it impossible for you to ever find us. Sarah, who had been studying the financial documents with surprising sophistication, pointed to a recurring pattern. Look at these transfers. They all lead back to a company called Desert Rose International. Victoria's fingers flew across her tablet. That's one of Fleming's primary shell companies. The amounts, they match exactly with the suspicious trades we found during the original investigation. He was hiding in plain sight, Kamal realized, using my own love of roses as a cover for his illegal operations. That's why he wanted that private server in House 3, right next to the garden where Rebecca and I would meet. Rebecca touched the screen gently. I used to send him false reports about garden maintenance, hiding my real observations in work orders and supply requests. Everything is still there in the old system archives, which is why he's so desperate now, Victoria added. With access to those archives, we can prove not only his financial crimes, but also his blackmail and threats. Sarah had moved to the windows, watching the sunset paint the rose gardens in shades of gold. What happens now? Now, Kamal said firmly, we end this. Victoria, prepare the evidence for the board and the authorities. It's time Fleming faced the consequences of his actions. Wait, Rebecca interrupted, years of caution still evident in her voice. What about the other board members involved? They have too much to lose. They might try to discredit us, claim I fabricated everything to cover up an inappropriate relationship. Kamal moved to stand beside her, close but not touching, respecting the space 12 years had put between them. The board has changed, Rebecca. Most of Fleming's allies are gone, replaced by people who value integrity over profit. And even if they weren't, he glanced at Sarah, still watching the roses. Some things are more important than corporate politics. Victoria's tablet chimed with an incoming message. Her eyes widened as she read it. Sir, Fleming's just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's claiming to have evidence of corporate espionage involving former employees. He's getting desperate, Kamal said, trying to strike first, to control the narrative. Then let's beat him to it, Sarah said suddenly, turning from the windows. Everyone looked at her in surprise as she continued. Mom spent 12 years gathering evidence to protect us. Now it's our turn to protect her. We need to tell our story first, but not just to the board, to everyone. Rebecca moved to her daughter's side. What do you mean? Victoria told me about the annual charity gala tomorrow night. All the major business leaders will be there, plus the media. If Fleming wants to make accusations, let him do it in front of everyone. We'll have all the evidence ready, and he won't be able to hide anymore. Kamal and Rebecca exchanged glances, seeing their own determination reflected in their daughter's face. Victoria was already typing rapidly on her tablet, a slight smile playing at her lips. The gala's guest list has already been finalized, she said, but I believe we can arrange a few last-minute additions. So after all, the event is celebrating family foundations and charitable giving. What better time to introduce the Al-Rahman family's newest generation? As the sun set completely, casting the rose gardens in deepening shadows, the four of them began to plan. In his Manhattan office, Fleming was doing the same, not realizing that his desperate bid for control was about to backfire spectacularly. The stage was set for a confrontation 12 years in the making, one that would finally bring all the secrets of Dubai into the light, not with violence or threats, but with truth and the unshakable bonds of family. The Hampton estate buzzed with activity as the sun rose on the day of the gala. Victoria moved efficiently through the house, coordinating with security teams and event planners, while keeping a watchful eye on the family she had grown increasingly protective of. In one of the estate's elegant guest rooms, Sarah stood before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The deep blue gown had been delivered early that morning, along with a team of stylists who helped her prepare for what would be her first public appearance as Kamal Al-Rahman's daughter. "You look beautiful, Habibi," Rebecca said from the doorway. She too had been transformed, wearing a sophisticated emerald dress that made her look every inch the accomplished woman she'd become, rather than the housekeeper she'd once been. "I'm nervous," Sarah admitted, touching the silver locket that now matched her mother's. "What if I say something wrong? What if I embarrass Father?" Rebecca moved to stand behind her daughter, gently adjusting a curl that had fallen out of place. "You could never embarrass him. You're brave and intelligent, just like he is. Besides," she smiled softly, "you've already faced worse than a room full of socialites." In his study, Kamal reviewed the final preparations with Victoria. "Fleming's board meeting this morning?" "Postponed," Victoria reported, satisfaction evident in her voice. Apparently, several key members were suddenly unavailable. They've all received anonymous tips about what will be revealed tonight. And the evidence? All secured and ready. Multiple copies in multiple locations, with a complete digital package prepared for the media. Victoria paused, checking her tablet. "Sir, there's something else. The Dubai hospital records. I've found something you should see before tonight." Before she could continue, there was a gentle knock at the study door. Sarah stood there, transformed by her gala attire, but still clutching her worn notebook. "Father, could we talk for a moment?" Victoria discreetly excused herself as Sarah entered the study. Kamal felt his throat tighten with emotion. She looked so much like Rebecca had at that age, but with his eyes and determination. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, sitting across from him, "about what happens after tonight, after everyone knows the truth. Are you worried?" Kamal asked gently. "Not about Fleming exactly, but..." She opened her notebook, revealing years of carefully preserved memories. "I spent so long imagining what my family might be like. Now that I have you both, I don't want to lose you again." Kamal moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, look at me. Nothing that happens tonight will change the fact that you are my daughter. No company, no scandal, no amount of money matters more than that. But your business can be rebuilt if necessary. Family cannot." He smiled, touching the locket around her neck. "Your mother taught me that, though it took me 12 years to fully understand it." In the doorway, Rebecca watched them silently, her heart full. Victoria appeared beside her, speaking softly. "The cars will be ready in an hour. Are you prepared for this?" Rebecca squared her shoulders. "I've been preparing for 12 years. Fleming thought he could keep us apart forever, use our love against us. Tonight he learns how wrong he was." The afternoon passed in a blur of final preparations. Security teams positioned themselves throughout the city, monitoring Fleming's movements. The gala venue, one of of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels was swept for surveillance devices. Victoria coordinated everything with military precision, leaving nothing to chance. As evening approached, Sarah stood in the estate's rose garden, drawing strength from the flowers that had played such a significant role in her parents' story. She touched a perfect white bloom, remembering the pressed petals in her mother's box of memories. "Ready?" Rebecca asked, joining her daughter among the roses. Sarah nodded, straightening her shoulders. "I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know it." Inside, Kamal received one final update from Victoria. "Fleming's en route to the gala. He's bringing his lawyers." "Good," Kamal replied, adjusting his cufflinks. "Let him bring all the legal protection he wants. Tonight isn't about lawsuits or corporate maneuvering. It's about truth." The sun was setting as three sleek black cars pulled away from the Hampton estate. In the middle vehicle, Sarah sat between her parents, feeling the weight of the moment, but also an overwhelming sense of brightness. After 12 years of separation, they were facing what came next together. What they didn't know was that Fleming had one last desperate card to play, a final attempt to maintain control that would force each of them to decide what they were willing to sacrifice for the truth and for each other. The Manhattan skyline glittered ahead of them, and somewhere in that glittering forest of lights a ballroom waited. In just a few hours, 12 years of secrets would finally come to light, not in whispers and threats, but in the full glare of public scrutiny. Sarah touched her locket once more, feeling the tiny photograph within. Tonight, that long-ago moment in Dubai would no longer be just a hidden memory. Tonight it would become the beginning of their new story. The grand ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the subtle wealth of Manhattan's elite. As Sarah entered between her parents, she felt the ripple of attention move through the crowd. Conversations paused, glasses stopped midway to lips, and dozens of curious eyes turned to study the unexpected trio. Victoria moved smoothly ahead of them, managing introductions with practiced ease. "Mr. Al-Rahman, we're so pleased you could join us. And this must be my daughter, Sarah," Kamal said clearly, his voice carrying to the nearest clusters of guests. "And her mother, Rebecca Martinez." The whispers began immediately, spreading through the room like wind through leaves. Sarah caught fragments of conversation. "Thought he wasn't married. Looked just like him. Wasn't she staff in Dubai?" Fleming's arrival created another ripple in the crowd. He faltered slightly upon seeing them, his practiced smile slipping before he recovered. He was an elegant man in his 60s, expensively dressed, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders as he approached. "Kamal," he said smoothly, "what an unexpected family reunion. Though perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private." "No more privacy, Marcus," Kamal replied, his voice pleasant but firm. "No more secrets." Rebecca's hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder as Fleming's gaze swept over them. "Ms. Martinez, you're looking well for someone who's been away for so long." "Mr. Fleming," Rebecca acknowledged calmly, "I see you still prefer roses in your buttonhole, though these look store-bought, not garden-grown." It was a small jab, but Sarah saw Fleming's jaw tighten. Before he could respond, Victoria appeared with several distinguished-looking individuals. "Mr. Al-Rahman, the board members would love to hear about your new family foundation, particularly the scholarship program for underprivileged youth that Sarah inspired." Fleming's eyes narrowed at this clearly orchestrated move. As Kamal began speaking with the board members, describing Sarah's resilience and the foundation's mission to help children like her, Rebecca guided her daughter toward the center of the room. "Watch," she whispered. "Victoria's making sure everyone hears our story first on our terms." Indeed, the crowd was warming to Sarah, drawn in by the tale of the brave girl who saved a stranger's life, only to discover he was her father. Women dabbed at their eyes as they heard about Rebecca's sacrifice, how she'd protected her daughter from threats and manipulation. Fleming moved through the crowd like a shark, trying to counter the narrative, but he was too late. The story had already captured imaginations and hearts. The moment came during Kamal's speech to the assembled guests. He stood at the podium, Sarah and Rebecca beside him, as he announced the foundation's mission. 12 years ago, fear and threats tore my family apart. Today, courage and love have brought us back together. This foundation will ensure that no other family faces such choices alone. That's when Fleming made his final desperate move. Touching story, he called out, his voice cutting through the applause. But perhaps we should discuss the real reason Miss Martinez left Dubai. The missing funds, the altered records. A hush fell over the ballroom. This was the moment they had prepared for. Actually, Victoria said, stepping forward with her tablet, let's discuss records. With a gesture, she brought up displays on the ballroom screens. Specifically, these records showing your offshore accounts, the shell companies, and the threats you made to cover it all up. She was gathering evidence, Sarah said clearly, her voice strong and sure. That's why she had to run. You threatened to frame her if she ever told my father the truth about me. Fleming's face had gone pale. These documents are clearly fabricated, like the ones you fabricated to hide your embezzlement, Kamal asked. Or perhaps like the false reports you created to threaten Rebecca. The one stored on that private server in House 3? Rebecca stepped forward, her grace and dignity silencing the room. I kept every record, every transaction, every threat. A good gardener knows that even the smallest seed can grow into something powerful, given time and care. The evidence continued to appear on the screens. Years of financial fraud exposed in elegant graphs and damning documents. But it was the personal evidence that truly captured the audience. The photograph of baby Sarah in the Dubai hospital, the pressed roses Rebecca had preserved, the matching lockets that proved a mother's love had never wavered. Fleming looked around the room, seeing his carefully constructed world crumbling. Board members were already stepping away from him, phones appearing as they called their lawyers. His own legal team stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of evidence against their client. You've lost, Marcus, Kamal said quietly, not because of the money or the fraud, but because you never understood what really matters. Family, truth, love. These aren't weaknesses to be exploited. They're strengths that can overcome any threat. As security discreetly led Fleming away, Sarah felt both her parents' hands in hers. They stood together, finally unafraid, as photographers captured the moment for tomorrow's papers. But the real story wasn't in the public drama, or Fleming's downfall. The real story was in the subtle things. The way Kamal kept glancing at Rebecca, love and regret and hope mingling in his eyes. The way Rebecca's shoulders finally relaxed, 12 years of tension melting away. The way Sarah stood tall between them, no longer the invisible street child, but a young woman who had brought her family back together through sheer determination and courage. Later that night, they would return to the Hampton Estates rose garden. Under the stars, they would begin the gentle work of becoming a family again. But for now, they stood in the glittering ballroom, their truth finally told, their future stretching out before them like a garden waiting to bloom. 2 weeks after the gala, the Hampton Estates rose garden had become a sanctuary for the newly reunited family. Sarah sat cross-legged on a marble bench, watching her mother tend to the flowers with the same care she'd shown in Dubai years ago. The morning sun cast a gentle glow over the scene, making the dewdrops sparkle like tiny diamonds on the petals. So you still remember all their names, Sarah observed, as Rebecca carefully pruned a particularly stunning pink bloom. Roses are like people, Rebecca replied, her voice soft with memory. Each one has its own character, its own story. This variety, for instance, Rosa Peace, was your father's favorite in Dubai. He said it reminded him of hope during difficult times. Victoria appeared at the garden entrance, tablet in hand as always, but her usual professional demeanor had softened over the past weeks. The lawyers have finished processing everything. Fleming's former associates have all agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. The evidence was too overwhelming for them to risk fighting it. And the company? Rebecca asked, straightening from her work. Stronger than ever, Victoria reported with satisfaction. The transparency of how everything was handled has actually increased investor confidence. The new charitable foundation is generating incredibly positive press. Sarah watched as her mother absorbed this information, noting how she no longer tensed at the mention of Fleming's name. The fear that had governed their lives for so long was finally fading, replaced by something stronger and more permanent. Kamal joined them in the garden, carrying a familiar wooden box. I thought you might want this back, he said to Rebecca. Victoria found it in the Dubai archives, your original garden plans for House 3. Rebecca opened the box carefully, revealing meticulously detailed drawings and notes. I remember creating these. Each garden section was designed to bloom in different seasons, ensuring there were always flowers throughout the year. Like our family, Sarah said thoughtfully. We were apart during different seasons of our lives, but now we're blooming together. Kamal smiled at his daughter's insight. Speaking of blooming, there's something I'd like to show you all. He led them to a previously unused section of the garden where a new bed had been prepared. I thought perhaps we could plant these together. 3 rose bushes waited to be planted, their roots carefully wrapped. Desert peace roses, Rebecca recognized immediately. The same variety from Dubai. A new beginning, Kamal said softly. Not to replace what was lost, but to grow something new from those memories. Together they began to work the soil, each taking a role in planting the roses. Victoria discreetly stepped away to handle calls and arrangements, but not before capturing a few photographs of the family working together. As they planted, stories began to flow. Rebecca sharing memories of Sarah as a baby, Kamal recounting the day's events that had led Sarah to save his life. Sarah describing her years of keeping her mother's memory alive through her notebook. I used to imagine moments like this, Sarah admitted, patting soil around one of the rose bushes. But the reality is better than anything I could have dreamed. Reality often is, Kamal replied, his hands covered in the same soil as his daughter's, his expensive suit forgotten in the joy of the moment. It has texture, imperfection, truth, all the things that make it precious. Rebecca stood to survey their work, her gardening expertise evaluating the placement. These will need time to establish themselves. The roots have to grow deep before the flowers can bloom properly. Like trust, Sarah said, and family. Victoria returned with refreshments, setting up a small table in the shade. As they gathered to rest from their work, she shared more updates about the foundation's progress. Children from Sarah's former shelter would be among the first to receive scholarships. The program would eventually expand to help other families separated by circumstances beyond their control. There's something else, Victoria added, looking particularly pleased. The nursing home where we work, Rebecca. They've agreed to partner with the foundation. Your patient care program will be implemented across multiple facilities. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. My patients, I never got to properly say goodbye. Actually, Kamal interjected, I was thinking we might visit them next week. The garden there could use some attention, and I know an excellent rose expert who might be willing to consult. The look that passed between Kamal and Rebecca spoke volumes. Understanding, forgiveness, and something deeper that had survived 12 years of separation. Sarah watched her parents, seeing how they were gradually finding their way back to each other. Not rushing, not forcing anything, but allowing their connection to rebuild naturally, like the roses they'd just planted. As the morning turned to afternoon, they remained in the garden, planning and sharing and simply being together. The new roses stood in their freshly planted bed, their leaves catching the sunlight. 3 plants that would grow separately but together, their roots gradually intertwining beneath the surface. Victoria's tablet chimed with more updates and meetings requiring attention, but for once everything else could wait. Some moments needed to be lived fully, captured not in photographs or documents, but in the heart's deepest gardens, where the most precious memories bloom eternal. 1 year later, the Hampton Estates garden was in full bloom, the 3 desert peace roses having grown into strong, flourishing plants. Sarah stood before them, adjusting her graduation cap while Victoria took photos for the Foundation's annual report. I still can't believe you're graduating as valedictorian, Rebecca said proudly, straightening Sarah's honor cords. The past year had transformed them both. Rebecca's constant watchfulness had softened into quiet confidence, while Sarah had blossomed in the warmth of her family's love. The speech is ready, Sarah assured them, patting the folder containing her valedictorian address. Though I'm still not sure about sharing our story. It's your story to tell, Kamal said, joining them in the garden. Like the roses they'd planted together, his relationship with Rebecca had grown gradually, naturally, blooming into something deeper and stronger than before. And it might help other families find their way back to each other. Victoria, who had become much more than an assistant to the family, reviewed the day's schedule on her tablet. The Foundation's new youth center opens next week. Several of the children from Hope's Haven have already enrolled in the summer programs. And the nursing home garden project? Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. She spent 3 days a week there, teaching patients and staff about the therapeutic benefits of gardening. Expanding to 5 new locations, Victoria reported with satisfaction. Your patient care program is being studied by healthcare organizations across the country. Sarah touched one of the peace roses gently. Sometimes I still expect to wake up back on the streets, to find this has all been a dream. Not a dream, Kamal assured her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Though perhaps a different kind of miracle. One built on love, truth, and the courage to fight for what matters most. They gathered in the garden for one last photo before heading to the graduation ceremony. As Victoria set up the shot, Sarah looked at her parents, her mother who had sacrificed everything to protect her, and her father, who had welcomed them both back into his life without reservation. The camera captured them among the roses they planted together. Sarah in her graduation robes, Rebecca radiant with pride, and Kamal beaming at them both. But it captured something else too. The invisible bonds that had strengthened over the past year, the trust that had grown as surely as the roses behind them. Later that afternoon, Sarah stood at the podium facing her graduating class. Her valedictory speech waited in front of her, but she spoke from her heart instead. A year ago, I was a girl without a family, keeping alive the memory of my mother through a worn notebook and a silver locket. Today, I stand before you as proof that love can overcome any obstacle, that truth has a power all its own, and that sometimes the longest journeys lead us right where we were always meant to be. In the audience, Rebecca and Kamal held hands, their matching wedding bands catching the light. Their quiet ceremony in the rose garden 3 months ago had been intimate and perfect, a celebration of love rekindled and strengthened by time and understanding. Victoria sat with them, her tablet set aside for once, simply present in the moment. She had declined countless job offers over the past year, choosing to stay with the family that had become her own in so many ways. As Sarah concluded her speech, she looked directly at her parents. Someone once told me that gardens need 3 things to thrive: strong roots, constant care, and the courage to bloom even after the harshest winter. Families are the same way. Our roots ground us, our love nurtures us, and our courage to trust again allows us to grow into something beautiful. The applause was thunderous, but Sarah barely heard it. She was looking at her mother's tears of joy, her father's proud smile, the roses in their hands, roses from their own garden blooming bright and true. That evening they gathered once more in the Hampton garden. The setting sun painted the roses in shades of gold, much like that long ago day in Dubai when their story began. But this was not an ending. It was a continuation, a new chapter in a story that would keep growing, keep blooming, season after season. Sarah touched the locket at her throat, no longer needing it to remember, but wearing it to honor the journey. Rebecca tended to the roses with the same love she now freely showed her family. Kamal watched them both, his heart full of the joy that only comes from finding what was lost and cherishing it more deeply for the finding. And in the garden, the peace roses bloomed, their petals open to the evening sky. 3 plants growing separately but together, their roots intertwined beneath the soil, their flowers reaching toward the same light, their beauty a testament to the enduring power of love, truth, and the courage to begin again.